Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Milano, and I'm the president of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club. We will be speaking today with Rob Wilcox. Rob is the federal legal director with Everytown for Gun Safety. In 2013, Mayors Against Illegal Guns and Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America came together to end gun violence, and now Everytown has more than 8 million supporters. A little bit about WDC. For over 60 years, WDC has been a vibrant network of politically active men and women. We are active on the local, state, and national levels, advocating for the increased role of women in our democracy, championing issues important to women, and working to keep all members of our society engaged and informed. We invite you to join WDC. And I'm going to just let you know, if you want to become a member, visit our website at womensdemocraticClub.org. Next is a list of our committees. If you're interested in getting involved, please get in touch with us through the website. Here's our executive team. A special thanks to all who brought this event together, including Barbara Zelenko, Scott Weber, Destiny Drake West, and Lisa Maria. This exciting speaker series is one way that WDC engages our community on important topics that need our attention. Recent past speakers have included this list of phenomenal advocates, authors, and public servants. In fact, you may know that Eleanor Roosevelt and First Lady Jill Biden have also spoken to WDC members in the past. So we work hard to bring you an impressive list of speakers. Next up, after this event today, we have Jamie Raskin, who will be talking about his new book, Unthinkable. A limited number of signed books are available for WDC members at Politics and Prose, and we'll give you that discount code at the end. Also, save the date here for our community forums when we will host candidates for governor, county executive, and state's attorney. You can submit your questions starting now via chat to the participant called Q&A. If you are an elected official, please message me so we can recognize you prior to the Q&A portion of our event today. Today's special guest is Rob Wilcox with an introduction from Senator Susan Lee. Susan Lee has been a gun violence prevention champion in Montgomery County, and I have personally been so excited to work with her over the years. She is Senator Susan Lee was elected to the Maryland State Senate in November 2014 after serving 13 years in the Maryland House of Delegates. She is the first Asian American senator elected to the Maryland Senate and the first minority senator in the Montgomery County delegation. She is currently the Deputy Majority Whip in the Senate, and a number of different committees that are incredibly important. And I will let her tell a little bit about that, as well as the legislation that she is going to be championing this session on gun violence prevention. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. Oh, I think you might be muted there. Yes.
Am I unmuted now? Thank you so much, President Leslie Milano and the WDC leadership for your outstanding leadership and advocacy on gun safety legislation, which has helped prevent gun tragedies. I'd like to just commend you on the bill that you had helped us on last year, a bill that is now law that require background checks on the sale of long guns and shotguns, which was vetoed by the governor, but you all helped us override that veto in 2021. So thank you for that. But I just wanted to quickly tell you about a bill that I and the Attorney General and Delegate Lopez are introducing this session. I just got off a press conference on that very issue about our ghost guns bill. Basically, and many of you probably know, ghost guns are guns that can be assembled from different parts and made into a gun. But unfortunately, they do not have serial numbers on them. They are untraceable and they don't require background checks. And so they're used increasingly as the weapon of choice by very violent criminals, domestic abusers, and unfortunately, just recently, terrorists and white supremacist groups, and now, unfortunately, children. So this bill would basically ban the possession of ghost guns and require that all guns that are assembled in different parts, they have to have a serial number on there. Fortunately for us, the Biden administration has decided to move forward on regulations to designate and clarify that those kits that are used to make ghost guns are actually firearms under the federal law, thereby requiring it to be serialized, but also have a background check on it. So that was a major move. But the reason why we're bringing the bill now is because the federal regulatory process takes a long time. They have to hear comments, they have to finalize the regulations, but until that time, we are building on the guidelines that we're going to complement what they're doing and pass a ban on ghost guns now, and that require that all these guns have a serial number on it that can be assembled, because they can be assembled very easily and they can wreak havoc. And I have to say, unfortunately, they're increasingly used by kids now. The kids can easily, a lot of kids now are real tech savvy. They can get the parts online and can assemble actually a ghost gun. And just recently, the Montgomery County Police had found a loaded ghost gun on a 15-year-old suspect fleeing and trying to leave Northwest High School in Montgomery County. So it's kind of chillingly scary. So we think this is common sense legislation, no brainer, that will help our law enforcement, because there's serial numbers on it, be able to solve crimes, to help our prosecutors solve those crimes, and also to protect Marylanders from gun tragedies and that have been caused by ghost guns that have devastated and shattered families. So we appreciate your help on this, and that is the bill moving forward that we have, that is being put forth by our Attorney General Brian Frosch, myself, and Delegate Lopez. We've been working on this for years, but the Attorney General has now made it one of his highest priorities. And I thank WDC for always supporting us on the gun safety laws. Now, President Milano, may I introduce our keynote speaker today?
Please do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the very distinct honor and privilege to be able to what I have to say, introduce a real sterling champion advocate of what I call gun safety all over the country. And he's been working around the clock and working with us in the different legislatures around the country on gun safety. So he is our great champion. He's currently the federal director of Everytown for Gun Safety, one of the largest gun violence prevention organizations in the country, with an impressive over 6 million supporters and more than 375,000 donors, including mayors, elected officials, survivors, moms, students, and everyday Americans, including Moms Demand Action, which is part now of Everytown. And we're grateful to him and Everytown, in particular, his colleagues Sam Levy and Monisha Smith, and of course, Andrea Chambry, who is the widow of slain Capital Gazette reporter John McNamara, and their team for helping us in Maryland pass all these major gun safety laws. As you know, Rob has had over 20 years of policy advocacy litigation experience prior to his working at the Bradley Center to Prevent Gun Violence. He leads all of Everytown's gun safety federal policy work and has incorporated his experience working with policymakers and stakeholders at all different levels of government. Rob is known for his expertise in the development of comprehensive approaches to gun safety violence and his technical advice on the development of evidence-informed policy solutions. And, he has been also unfortunately touched personally through a family member, been a victim of gun violence. So without further ado, I give you our wonderful Rob Wilcox.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Senator Lee. Your leadership in pushing forward solutions, from the background check work you did that you never stopped on, from first bringing the bill and then overcoming a veto to taking up the mantle of ghost guns, is exactly what we need if we're going to address this deadly and unique American problem. So I can't thank you enough for what you and your colleagues are doing to make us all safer here in Maryland. I also have to thank President Milano and the Women's Democratic Club for this invitation. Your speaker series is far more impressive than my resume or accomplishments, and it is an absolute honor and privilege to be here with you to share some thoughts about kind of gun violence prevention, gun rights extremism, and where I think we're heading. And my last thanks is to everyone who joined this Zoom. I know for many of us, schools closed unexpectedly, and we're balancing work, we're balancing life, we're balancing kids, and to have such a great turnout is really, really wonderful. So thank you all for being here. Especially, I see some of my good friends from Moms Demand Action, who are an incredible grassroots force. And really, it does take all of us to make a difference on this issue for some of the reasons that I'm going to talk about. I think I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes before we turn to Q&A. And I think my comments really are going to start with kind of where we are right now with not just respect to gun violence and policy, but gun rights extremism. I think it's incredibly important that we recognize this moment as well as how we got here, touching on a version of the Second Amendment that fuels gun rights extremism, but is completely divorced from the history and the law. And then talk a bit about what we're seeing with respect to gun violence and some of the solutions that we're working on at the local state of Maryland and federal level before jumping into your questions. The place I want to start is with a quote, not a quote that I admire, but honestly a quote that terrifies me. It's from the one and only Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, where she says, ultimately the truth is it's our Second Amendment rights, our right to bear arms that protects Americans and give us the ability to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government. And she's talking about Stacey Abrams' platform for gun violence prevention, things like background checks. And she said, and I hate to use this language, but Democrats, they're doing exactly what our founders talked about when they gave us the precious rights that we have. What that quote is about is it's rooted in something called the insurrectionist theory of the Second Amendment. It's a theory that the former president alluded to at times, and it's a theory that we hear coming up more and more. It's this belief that the right to bear arms is rooted in the ability to overthrow your own government. It's rooted in the idea that the founders gave us the right to take apart the very democratic institutions that they fought a revolution to create. It's a theory that's not rooted in history, tradition, or law. It's a theory that's not found in the Federalist Papers, but it's a theory that started taking hold really in the 1970s, when the gun lobby, the National Rifle Association, took a turn from its roots as a hunting organization and a gun safety organization, an organization that my grandfather belonged to, and veered towards an organization that was a no holds barred, no compromise entity that stood by an idea that any slight improvement in gun safety would be an affront to what their beliefs, would lead to taking of all firearms, would be a slippery slope. These arguments that we may have heard before, but it's that moment in time in the late 1970s was called the Revolt in Cincinnati, where a group of extremists on the floor of an NRA convention took over the leadership and began this path, a path that really mainstreamed this insurrectionist theory of the Second Amendment. The belief that voting, the freedom of press, the freedom of assembly, all of the freedoms in our Constitution and Bill of Rights are not sufficient to protect our democracy, but it has to be the people with firearms who will, on their own, decide that it is time to take action. And this isn't just theoretical anymore. We've seen it with our own eyes, and we've seen it in our research. I can tell you that Everytown for Gun Safety partnered with the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project to begin tracking the presence of armed groups and individuals at demonstrations. And we've chronicled over 610 armed demonstrations in our country since the beginning of 2020. Many of these happen at state capitals. Many of them happen as counter protests, but over 80% of them are associated with right-wing ideology. Right-wing organizations like Oath Keepers, Boogaloo Boys, those who are actively advocating to overthrow our government. The phenomenon of an armed presence in the public settings is even more common when it comes to pro-Trump demonstrations, including Stop the Steal events, which have continued throughout this country. And pro-Trump demonstrations are 4 times as likely to involve armed demonstrations. And we chronicled over 110 armed pro-Trump demonstrations in 2020 and 2021. Nearly half of these occurred at legislative grounds. This just underscores the threat to our democratic institutions. But perhaps what's most alarming to me is that armed pro-Trump demonstrations actually increased in 2021 as compared to 2020. We don't have to look much further than what happened about a year ago on the Capitol grounds to see what the insurrectionist theory is willing to do. There was enough ammunition at that insurrection to shoot every member of Congress 5 times. There was all of the threats that you could imagine being made about our duly elected lawmakers and what would happen to them. This is the gun rights extremism, not only as a threat to our democracy, threat to our elected officials, the attempted kidnapping of the elected governor of Michigan, but is also the ideology that stands in the way of progress on good gun safety laws like the ones that are being proposed by Senator Lee and other public officials who are looking to end what is the kind of uniquely American and tragic form of gun violence that we see in our schools, we see in our malls, we see in our cities, we see in our homes, we see it every single day. And that's where these pieces come together. The armed extremism mentality, insurrectionist theory, not only fuels the attack on the Capitol, not only fuels the intimidation of peaceful protesters and elected state officials, but also fuels opposition to things like background checks on all gun sales, things like extreme risk protection orders, regulation of ghost guns. And we have to stand both for common sense policy and against this wrong-headed interpretation of the Second Amendment. And so what is the truth about the Second Amendment? The truth is we've had regulation of firearms since the founding, that the individuals who wrote the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, also lived in states that regulated firearms extensively. They regulated who could carry firearms. They regulated where you could carry firearms. They regulated how you would store your firearms. There was never a Wild West in this country where guns were completely unfettered and there were no rules. Honestly, the only time in our history that that's happening is right now, as the gun lobby seeks to roll back laws around who could have guns, where you can carry them, and how you use them. And this is reflected not just if you look back, and we've done extensive research into the laws that were on the books during the colonial period, but it's if you look at what the founders in fact were saying about the Second Amendment. And the reason that the founders put it in place was a concern about standing armies. Before the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, the weaker version of the document, it outright deeply restricted the idea of a standing army, a federal army. But when they came time to write the Constitution, there was an understanding we would need a federal standing army to take on threats to our democracy. The Second Amendment was meant to protect the individuals who would serve in a militia, and who, because the militia did play instrumental roles at times during the Revolutionary War. However, the militias they didn't live up to the myth, and there's been a lot of books that have explored this fact. And the truth is, the federal government started regulating militias quite heavily in the founding era. They passed the Militia Act, which was put in place requirements on who could serve, how you serve, and your firearms. And militias were taken away from state control and became the province of the federal government. It is against all common sense in the historical record that the amount of effort that was put in to protect our freedoms, which was federalism, right? States and federal government are sharing power, the separation of powers between the judiciary, the presidency, and Congress, and all of the protections that were put in around the franchise, the right to vote, would be undermined when certain individuals made a personal determination that it was time to overthrow their government, and that was what the system the founders were looking to set up. And honestly, not only do you see that when you look back at the founding era, if you look at the landmark Supreme Court decision on the Second Amendment, DC versus Heller, which happened in 2008, what you'll see is an adoption of an individual right to have a firearm in your home to protect yourself. That is so far from the insurrectionist theory that you'd be able to not just have a gun in your home to protect yourself, but a gun in your home to then bring to your state capitol to threaten your elected officials, to bring to Congress to try to overthrow an election. The Supreme Court didn't even contemplate that when it established individual right. And that was a decision written by Justice Scalia. So if you look at the founding era, you look at now, what I can tell you is this insurrectionist theory is not rooted anywhere, and we have to speak up against it. We have to say that showing up armed at a protest, showing up armed at a state capitol, showing up armed at a vote counting facility, that threatens our democracy. That doesn't support it. And I think standing up to armed extremism does go a long way towards getting to the other part of our goal, which is to pass the type of laws that will reduce gun violence in this country. And there are solutions in place, solutions that, the state of Maryland has strong laws about public carry, doesn't allow armed open carry at demonstrations or at state capitals. There's strong regulation about who can, how a gun can be displayed in public. But there's also tools at the federal government, right? That the federal government can be enforcing our civil rights laws to make sure that if a person does bring a firearm to a state capitol or a demonstration to suppress civil rights, that we are using our civil rights laws to make sure people are held accountable and that they are not actively suppressing our civil rights to peacefully assemble, to vote, and to have our officials do the business of government. And so I do think it requires us to take on the NRA, to take on the gun lobby, and to take on gun rights extremism directly and forcefully, to say that that is not the world we're living in. We do not believe in this big lie about an election and the need to show up armed at the Capitol to overthrow it. And that's work that we're doing. And we do it on a regular basis when we are writing reports, where we are assessing the growth of armed extremism, the groups that are participating in it, and what we need to be doing to stand up to it. And now let's move to the second part that I'd love to speak with you about, which is gun violence in America, gun violence in Maryland, gun violence in our cities in Maryland, especially Baltimore. We've seen an incredible spike in gun violence during the pandemic, and we saw more gun deaths last year, as reported by the CDC, than we've had for decades. And that is driven by a spike in homicides that we've seen in our cities across the country. And frankly, there have been some decreases, but overwhelming, the trend is that cities are seeing homicides at all-time record highs. And last year we saw 45,000 Americans die from gun violence overall, 2/3 being suicide and about 1/3 being homicide. In an average year in Maryland, 724 people die from gun violence, and about 1,747 are wounded. That's about the 22nd highest rate of gun violence in the United States. Maryland has and if you think of that cost, not just in terms of people and trauma and loved ones, but also in terms of economic cost, the societal cost to gun violence in Maryland is about $6 billion per year, of which $376 million is paid directly by taxpayers. So gun violence is taking a toll, not just on ourselves and our family and our concerns, but on our economy. In Maryland, what we know is 36% of gun deaths are suicide and 62% are homicides. That's the exact opposite of the national numbers that we see, where nationally 60% of gun violence are suicides and 38% are homicides. The other place that we've seen gun violence spike during the pandemic is in schools. And we've seen more incidents of gunfire on school grounds at the beginning of this school year than at any point since we began tracking gunfire on school grounds in 2013. Gunfire on school grounds is driven by a few things. One, it's driven by individuals who are from the school, almost always students, who have shown warning signs and who access firearms from the home. Nearly 80% of the guns used in school shootings come from the home. The other place in this state where we've seen a spike in gun violence is in the city of Baltimore, where we've seen really significant numbers of homicides, a rate that began increasing around 2015 that's remained high ever since. Baltimore was one of the few cities that didn't see an increase from 2019 to 2020. It actually saw a decrease in the gun violence numbers. However, 2021 appears to have once again seen another spike. And so that's a picture of gun violence. And I think it's concerning because of the interpersonal gun violence. It's concerning because of the threats to school. It's concerning because of the emerging youth mental health crisis. And although we did not see an increase in gun suicide last year, what we saw was a incredibly significant increase in gun suicide amongst young people. And that trend is incredibly concerning, especially as someone with young children at home, where you know that the pressures of the pandemic, as well as just the pressures of being a teenager in this country, have been exacerbated, and we've seen more and more young people turn to suicide. Now, taking that together, I think the question is always, what are the solutions that we want to work on? What are the solutions that can reduce the gun violence that we see locally and in our state and our country? And what are the different levers that can be pulled? Locally, I think if I'm looking at the city of Baltimore, Mayor Scott has done a really incredible job in thinking about a comprehensive approach to gun violence. He's thinking about invigorating kind of law enforcement to focus on the targeted individuals who are most likely to commit gun violence, as well as investing heavily in community-based solutions that have been proven to work to reduce gun violence, shootings, non-fatal injuries, as well as homicides. And he's looking upstream, because in Baltimore, at least 82% of the guns recovered last year were originally purchased outside the city, with nearly 65% of the guns coming from outside the state of Maryland. So there's a lot that can be done when it comes to gun trafficking and the guns that are illegal guns that are entering the city. And so when I look at that plan, I see him trying to take the all of the above approach of, we need targeted law enforcement. We need community to rebuild the trust between the police and the community. We need community-based solutions that are going to be funded over the long term, that are using evidence-informed strategies, and we need to get at the illegal guns that are entering the city. And Everytown's been proud to partner with Mayor Scott to build a first of its kind innovative tool that actually looks at the guns that are coming in, provides information to the city and law enforcement so that you can address those trafficking channels directly. There's only so much that the city of Baltimore, even the state of Maryland, can do, since, as I said, so many of these guns come from outside of the state. The other local thing we need to do is work in our schools. We need to have our schools investing in the mental health supports that will help our kids who are in crisis, the kids who are suffering because of the pandemic, because of bullying, because of the natural stressors. And this isn't just something that I think we see at the local level. We've seen the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, even before this school year started, talk about the elevated level of stressors. We've seen funding made available to schools, and we need to invest that funding in mental health supports. MCPS has proposed hiring 50 new social workers and has spoken about the investments they'll be making going forward. But that's something that not only has to show up in terms of a proposal, but at the end of the day needs to show up in effect. Right? I'm very pleased to see MCPS make those commitments, but at the end of the day, it's not about the commitments, about the mental health of the students in our county, and are those commitments the right ones to actually help those who are in need. The other thing we need to do is make sure that everyone who has guns legally in our county are securing them storely. We have a law on the books in Maryland that says it's illegal to allow a child to have access to your gun, and we need to make sure that parents know that. Because what we see in way too many school shootings is that children who are in crisis get access to unsecured guns, bring them to school, and tragedy ensures. No parent, no gun owner wants that to happen. And so we need to have our schools and local officials be making sure that secure storage is part of our public awareness conversation, so that we are giving that information about the importance of it and how to securely store your firearm. And that's something our local officials can really lead on, as well as investing in the community-based solutions that we know work. And community-based solutions, when I speak about that, I'm thinking of the street outreach programs that focus on the individuals most at risk of committing gun violence. I'm thinking of the hospital-based intervention programs that have been shown to reduce gun violence and retaliation, where you work directly with an individual who enters a hospital. I'm talking about crime prevention through environmental design, greening vacant lots. And I'm talking about investing in cognitive behavioral therapy. These are all evidence-informed strategies that have shown great promise in reducing gun violence. At the state level, we heard from Senator Lee, and we've heard about her incredible leadership. And I have to tell you, Ghost Guns is one of the most important things that can happen this session. And it's something we have to support her on, because I've heard from Commissioner Harrison in Baltimore, and I've heard from the Attorney General that ghost guns is one of the fastest growing sources of illegal guns in our state, in our community. And it's a place that we are going to see leadership from the federal government, which I'll talk about in a second. But the federal government can only go so far with regulation. It can deal with the proliferation of ghost guns, those that are being sold, but it can't deal with guns that are actually in possession right now. And that's something that the state can lead on, and that Senator Lee has been an incredible champion for. I think she had to leave this session potentially to go participate actually in a ghost guns press conference with the Attorney General and law enforcement. And so that is an area that it's actually one of the very few areas that Maryland's law is not as strong as it could be, but it's incredibly important to stay ahead of this emerging trend. The other place that Maryland can continue to lead is in making funding available for local communities to invest in community-based violence intervention programs. Mayor Scott has a great plan, but he needs funding that can be made available through state sources, either through federal grants or through existing budgets that will make a significant difference in giving these programs the sustained funding they need over the long term to be built out with the evidence-informed strategies that will work. Last but not least, before I close, I want to talk about Congress, right? I mean, we're there. We know this community knows. I knows kind of the inner workings on Capitol Hill as well as anyone. And progress on Capitol Hill is challenging. We've all seen that. We have seen some pretty significant successes, like with the American Rescue Plan. Significant funding has been made available that's been used to support these community-based violence intervention programs. We've seen a bipartisan group of senators talk about the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization that they're planning to introduce, which includes a provision that would address a loophole in federal law that allows violent dating partners to continue to have guns, even though violent spouses can't. In 1996, we actually strengthened our federal law to say a spouse or someone who shares a house or child with someone who's committed a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence or is under a domestic violence restraining order can't have a gun, can't buy a gun. Those laws have been shown to work. However, as things have progressed, what we see is as many women are murdered by a dating partner as a spouse. And so the simple fact of a roof or a ring shouldn't be what makes the difference. It should be the act of domestic violence which leads to a firearm prohibition. And I think the bipartisan bill that's being worked on in the Senate that was announced in December is a really important step. And it's something that we're gonna really fight for when it gets released. The other piece of federal legislation that I'm really interested in is the Build Back Better Act, which we know is in a state of flux. The president talked about it yesterday at his press conference, but has a very important piece that would invest $5 billion into the community-based violence intervention programs I spoke about. Specific federal grant money that could go to support communities in this public health approach. It is an incredibly important piece of the Build Back Better Act, and something that we think is vital to addressing the gun violence that we're seeing in cities across this country. Of course, we're going to continue to push on expanding background checks, just like Senator Lee was able to improve Maryland's law and stuck to it and overrode the veto. We know that in Congress, we're going to have to keep pushing to pass legislation that will require a background check on all gun sales. Even if in Maryland, you can't go to a website like armslist.com to buy a gun without a background check, our research has shown that there's about 1 million ads on just this one website where you could go a year, where you could buy a gun without a background check. Meet in a parking lot, you meet on the outside of a gun show, cash is exchanged, and within minutes, a gun goes from one hand to the other. And our investigation into these websites found that 1 in 9 people who try to buy a gun online would fail a background check. So it's a place that individuals who fail background checks are going to try to buy guns. But we know that background check laws matter, because if you have a background check law, the sellers will act responsibly. In states that don't have background check laws, less than 5% of the sellers would tell a buyer, we need a background check on this gun sale. They would just meet up and do it. I saw one seller who said, who compared it to selling a pair of, he said, tennis shoes. However, in states with background check laws, we see about 85% of sellers saying we have to have a background check. Just think about that difference. You're going from less than 5% of background checks to over 80%. That is a significant change if you pass a law that says there should be background checks on all gun sales. The other place that gives me optimism in terms of preventing gun violence is the work of this administration. I think what's gotten lost this past year is how much leadership we've seen from President Biden, Vice President Harris, and other members of the administration who have really done things on gun violence prevention that we have never seen before. There's been a commitment to invest in community violence intervention programs starting earlier last year, which has made historic investments through changing how federal grant programs operate, through providing guidance about American Rescue Plan funds, and pushing for funding in the Build Back Better Act as well as in the appropriations. And it's created an acceptance for community violence intervention programs that we're seeing trickle down through states and local governments, and we're seeing real sustained investments in ways that we've never seen before. And that's not just with the funding that's been made available, but it's the guidance and it's the encouragement. For example, the Department of Labor just put out guidance about how Department of Labor grant programs can be used for summer youth employment. Summer youth employment is shown to be one of the most significant ways to reduce youth gun violence. And so we're going to use a grant program that's been existed for a while on something that we know could really make a difference, both in terms of creating good habits, creating opportunities for work, but also for preventing gun violence. And the president has called out 26 different existing grant programs that can go for these purposes. And we've actually done the work to catalog all the information about those 26 programs and create a clearinghouse so that folks can access the information. The president has also taken incredibly important steps on suicide prevention, activating the Department of Veterans Affairs and Health and Human Services to really focus on access to guns as part of a comprehensive approach to suicide prevention. For the first time, not saying that it's the exclusive solution, but including it in part of the conversation and committing to a significant public awareness campaign about the need for secure storage of firearms, not just in your home, but potential out-of-home storage opportunities. Maryland's one of the few states, and it's incredible, and we need more of it, to create an interactive map that a person can go on to find places to store their gun out of their home if they're in crisis. And that's something any of us can do to help with. If I knew a neighbor or a friend who was looking for help, who was in crisis, it's a thing that I can do to give them information, to even go with them, to create a time and space between them and the firearm, which is what we know is dramatically important. And the last thing the president's done is really focus on gun trafficking. And he has taken a number of concrete steps to go after rogue gun dealers, and has proposed regulation for ghost guns, as Senator Lee alluded to. And the regulation has been proposed and would say that anyone who is selling, in the business of selling ghost gun part, would have to become a federally licensed dealer, would have to put a serial number on the part, would have to do a background check. And it has made its way through the regulatory process where the notice and comment period has occurred. About 100,000 comments and support were generated through Everytown, which we're very proud of, and Moms Demand Action. And we're hoping that rule gets finalized in June. As Senator Lee said, what that rule will do is they'll say, if you're in the business of selling these products, well, you'll have to act like anyone else in the industry. That doesn't address necessarily the guns that are in the hands of individuals, armed extremists, children, and others. And so there is additional work that can happen at the state and local level in partnership with the federal government to identify, folks who are underage who have bought this gun online, and to take steps to get these guns out of the wrong hands. So I'm really encouraged by the work that's been done over the past year by this administration. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with them, not just on those areas, but on school safety, on really remaking the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and to see an administration that lives up to the incredible promises that Joe Biden made to take on gun violence in all its forms. I know these are difficult times, and I know these tragedies are
my headphones just died. That was exciting. That happens to me way too often. I think I just burn through them. But just to conclude before we turn to questions and answers, these are clearly challenging times with multiple issues that we're focused on. And I know I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to share with such an incredible group kind of where we are in terms of the fight for gun safety, in terms of the fight to protect our democracy, and some of the things that I think we really can be doing at the local, state, and federal level to save lives. Because at the end of the day, when I think about this work, I don't think about it in terms of the laws that we pass. I think about it in terms of the lives that we save. And that's the measure that I hold myself to. And if we all hold ourselves to, then we could be really fighting for the solutions that will make the most difference to keep people alive and to keep our communities safe and healthy, and to keep our kids feeling secure so that they can go to school with the optimism and the encouragement and the belief that their brightest future is in front of them, rather than the concern of, will they make it home that day? And so I just thank you so much for this opportunity. I thank you so much for the work that you're doing in this space and others, and look forward to taking your questions and having a bit of a conversation with President Milano.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was phenomenal. We have so many questions here that I'm just going to get right to it. So one question that came in is with regard to MCPS. Have you seen any movement towards MCPS actually hiring more mental health workers instead of just talking about it?
Yep, they have certainly begun the process. They have, the MCPS has reported that they plan to hire 50 additional social workers. I believe that they've appropriated the money from federal American Rescue Plan funds. And so I don't know that they've been hired as of yet, but I know that they have the dollars, they have the outlines of what they're looking for. And the board hearing I was at the other day, they spoke affirmatively as if it was underway.
Okay. Next, what is the status of the March for Our Lives movement?
March for Our Lives was a real inspiration when we saw the students in Parkland kind of take a mantle and take a stand against gun violence, and that march has become kind of a movement, and that those groups have become an organization, and it's an organization I continue to work with to this day, and I think they've really captured the youth voice in a way that we need to further this issue, because they're thinking honestly about not just the moment we live in now, but true generational change.
I see to the side here that our former president of WDC, Fran Rothstein, just said, "I just donated to Everytown for gun safety. Anyone want to join me?" There's some other items here in the chat with regard to Moms Demand Action. I'll come back to that. We're just going to keep going with some of these questions here. How do you explain the relationship between the pandemic and gun violence, both suicide and homicide?
I mean, honestly, that is the biggest question, and the researchers are digging into that now. But I think from what we can tell from the research that has been produced is that it's been a confluence of events. It's been the pandemic exacerbating root causes that were already problematic. Food insecurity, home insecurity, a disconnection between individuals and social services that were necessary to create stability. Another theory focuses on the lack of trust between communities and police, and the lack of policing. There isn't as much evidence there yet. But we know that kind of trust is an important factor in public safety. And then the last piece, which we've just received kind of new research on, is that the increase, the guns that were purchased and the increase in gun purchasing led to the guns that were used in crime during 2020. And what I mean by that is guns that were purchased in 2020 were used in crime in 2020 at a rate higher than we'd ever seen. And it's something called time to crime. It's an indicator of gun trafficking, and it's a really strong way to look at, are we seeing guns that are purchased that with the intent to be used in crime, or are we seeing guns that are purchased and then down the line they might change hands? And in 2020, we saw guns that were purchased in 2020 be used in crime in 2020 at rates that we had never seen before.
I just want to take a moment to also recognize some of the folks that we have here. We have Scott Goldberg and Laura Henderson from the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, and Tom DeGonia, candidate for Montgomery County State's Attorney. Next question is, what are some examples of successful campaigns in various states? What states are doing well when it comes to gun violence prevention?
So that's an interesting question. Just today, we released a new tool that looks at every single state and breaks them down to 5 categories. We rank each state by, against 50 different types of laws, as well as the gun violence rate. And we break it from states that are doing really well to states that are true national embarrassments. And then that's a resource that we could certainly share. But honestly, if you see states like New York, California, Hawaii, you see both a lot, strong gun laws as well as low rates of gun violence. And I think that's because they're continuing to look to strengthen their laws. And that's something that we're seeing in Maryland now, Leslie, that we've never seen before. As we've seen, that's incredible. What we've seen in Maryland now that we've never seen before is continued focus on improving the laws year after year, not eliminating gun ownership, not saying that responsible law-abiding citizens can't have firearms. No one's saying that. What we're saying is, how do we put in place the laws and programs that will reduce gun violence and reduce access to guns by people who shouldn't have them because they are intent on committing harm to themselves or others. And so Maryland is taking those steps now. And so I'm really encouraged by what we see with our leadership in Maryland, from fighting for the background check bill to now working on the ghost gun legislation, as well as violence intervention funding. So honestly, I've worked in lots of states, and I think that they're good examples, but I think Maryland is a place that we can continue to have success and continue to support the strong work that's happening in places like Baltimore to make sure that we're shutting off the supply of illegal guns and funding the programs that work. Obviously, the supply of illegal guns will take coordination, and I think there's room for voices there to speak about, we need the local and state actors to do their part, but we also need the federal government. Right? If 65% of the guns end up in Baltimore from outside the state of Maryland, we need the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to step in and address those gun trafficking channels, to address the federally licensed gun dealers that are supplying those firearms. I think you're on mute.
Do you support holding parents legally responsible for damages caused by their child who accesses a gun which is insufficiently or inadequately stored?
Yes. I think it's incredibly important that we raise let me answer this question, I think, with the nuance it deserves. Not everyone knows how important secure storage is. I think there is a good amount of information, but we need to raise awareness about how important secure storage is, not just to your home, but also to your community, right? I've talked about schools and the guns that come from the home. I think that's part one. Part two is we need to make secure storage devices easily accessible. Right? It should not be hard or challenging to both get the information of why it's important, but get the information of how to do it well. This shouldn't be a challenge, right? It's not like we hear, well, a seatbelt important, and then we have to go find our own seatbelt, right? Our cars are coming with them. It's not like we know that a car seat's required, and it's really challenging to find car seats available that meet the standards. I think so. We need to have awareness. We need to have availability, and then we need to have accountability. So I guess we can call it the AAA: awareness, availability, accountability. And I think that is critically important, that if you are not taking the steps to secure your firearm, right, then you need to be held accountable if someone accesses it who shouldn't. And I think that's not just children. I think it's thieves, and I think it's other unauthorized users, and especially if harm is committed. I don't think there should be a significant criminal penalty if you don't secure your firearm and that's it. However, if you don't secure your firearm and someone accesses it and causes harm, or there's a risk of harm, then yeah, I think there needs to be accountability, because I think that is a message that has to be sent. It's a standard that we have to have. And the truth is, you see red, blue, and purple states that have these laws on the books, and we need to be kind of enforcing them with the kind of clarity they deserve, so that individuals know that this is the standard we're setting for ourselves and our community, and an expectation that you have to live up to be a responsible gun owner.
There's one here that was interesting. I didn't know this. We have 4 high schools that teach kids how to shoot guns at school. Parkland school shooter participated in this program, and the person writing this says, I'm with Peace Action Montgomery, and we, along with Veterans for Peace and the American Public Health Association, have been advocating to stop these programs. Have you taken a position on these school ranges, and what can you say about those?
I haven't taken a position on those. I mean, I learned to shoot guns at a young age from my father, and I don't think that's unusual in this country. Those firearms were securely stored, and we didn't have access to them unless we were being supervised. And I think different localities have different interest in the skills that they're giving their kids. On the other hand, I do not think teaching kids about secure storage is the answer to the issue of unauthorized access to guns. I think that is an approach that is never been shown to work, and I actually think is destined to fail. If you look at the NRA's flagship program, Eddie Eagle, they use cartoons and coloring books to try to tell kids not to touch guns, when in fact it's the parent's responsibility. And to the prior question, Leslie, that's why these laws are important, is they actually say it's not the child, it's the parent who's responsible for securing the gun store, not the kid who's not responsible for seeing a gun and running away, right? That's the wrong way to approach it. The right way to approach it is parents have this responsibility. So I don't have a position on particular clubs at schools that may be teaching sports shooting or firearm education, but I don't think that's what you can rely on to actually prevent unauthorized access to firearms.
We have two questions that are a bit similar. How do you coordinate with other gun safety organizations, such as the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, March for Our Lives, Moms Demand Action, which we know Moms Demand Action is really a subsidiary of sorts for Everytown? Do the different gun safety organizations each have a different focus? Brady and Giffords, sometimes it's hard to know where to send limited donation dollars.
I think Everytown is a great choice if you're thinking of making a donation. I think we do work across the board and in all 50 states, but I have only the utmost respect for my partners in this movement. I am friends and know them and communicate them on a regular basis. I do think each organization brings something a little different and special to this movement, and I think that's important because we're able to, I think, combine our forces and let, in some campaigns, one organization lead versus others, another organization. And I think that it's just really powerful when we come together. And I've seen that most recently with the community violence intervention funding. The Community Justice Action Fund is an incredible Black-led organization, started by a woman named Amber Goodwin, led now by someone named Greg Jackson. And Greg really brought everyone together to say, look, we all are trying to fight for community violence intervention funding. We've all done different things, right? Giffords really was a pioneer in lifting up these programs and writing the kind of research reports about why they work. Everytown has a pretty significant grant program where we give about $25 million, give $25 million in grants to community-based organizations. So we have expertise both in working with entities as well as on staff. And Greg really, and March for Our Lives sees this as a true racial justice issue. And they are willing to go to the mat fighting for how important it is to have community violence intervention be centered in the conversation about gun violence prevention. And I think coming together as well, not only with those groups, but with other organizations, civil rights groups, education groups, it's made for an incredibly strong campaign strategy. And we've seen, as I said, more progress in this funding space than I think we've seen, than I expected to see, and more progress than we've seen for years.
I also want to recognize a few folks here from Moms Demand Action: Melissa Ladd, Vita Larkin, Danielle Veith, Giselle Morsch. So I might have missed some folks, but thanks so much for joining us today. Next question is, let's see, are there is actually, hold on, just moving things around here. In the last few weeks, the House version of Ethan's Law of Safe Storage has gotten a lot of co-sponsors. Do you think this increases its possibility for passing?
Yeah, I mean, I think co-sponsors is a clear sign that a bill has the support of the caucus. And if you clear the magic number of 218 co-sponsors, then you've shown that not only do you have support, but you have enough votes to actually pass the bill. And we know that, leadership in either chamber, except in very rare circumstances, is interested in bringing bills to the floor that have the support to pass. So increasing co-sponsors, reaching the kind of magic number are incredibly important signals that a bill should be brought to the floor for a vote.
One question here, our kids are already terrified that someone with bad intentions will hurt them. A few weeks ago, I think it was, some MCPS students were really filled with fear after a TikTok video warned of mass gun violence at our schools. We had talked about this. My daughter actually texted me to say 7 kids in her class, middle school, were crying and had to go home. And a friend also let me know that her kids were home that day for fear that the threats were legitimate. So what do you see in the next 5 to 10 years? It's sort of getting worse in terms of gun violence and really the fear, the intense fear for our students and our kids. So what are your thoughts there? What do we have to look forward to, and what can we do?
Look, Leslie, I remember that day. I remember getting alerts from the principal of my daughter's middle school. And I also know that, the TikTok rumor was largely unfounded, but that doesn't change, I think, the key point that you're making, which is the fear that it causes because school shootings are way too close to reality. A TikTok video like that happened in, Japan or Australia or United Kingdom would be seen as just a prank, but because of access to guns in this country, it is seen as a reality. So I think the first thing I'd say is if students didn't have access to guns, there wouldn't be school shootings. 3 out of 4 school shootings are done with a gun from the home. So if MCPS is telling us about threats, they should also be telling every single parent, lock up your guns. I told them this at a board hearing just the other day. Those are opportunities to communicate that important message, right? It's not a time to say, to just say this is a threat and we've looked into it, but to say one of the most important things you can do, obviously check on your children, look for the warning signs, make sure that you're supporting them. But if you have guns in the home, make sure you lock them up, because more likely than not, if there is going to be an incident, that gun's coming from the home. So I think we have to continue to spread that message, and we have to use the tools available, like extreme risk protection orders, if guns are accessible by people who are at risk. And our county sheriff has done that, has been a real leader. And when he testified in the state capitol, he has said that they have prevented school shootings by using extreme risk protection orders to make sure that guns are not in the home of students who are at risk to committing an act of school violence. So I think that is incredibly important. I also think we have to be investing in the positive school climates that will make sure that even if there are threats or things that are happening in this country, then we know that we fought to have our schools have the positive school climate where our kids feel confident that them and their classmates get the supports that they need, that they will be safe. And so I think we have to do both of those things, and we have to do them with the urgency, because if our kids are concerned, if our kids are worried, they are not focused on learning.
2 very quick questions to wrap up here. So how do we increase the mental health surveillance and support, but really the surveillance as well, so we can identify these potential school shooters and help to get them the resources that they need before they take action?
Great question. I know we're short on time, but I wrote a report on this, and I think there's concrete things that are evidence informed. The truth is that when you look at targeted school violence, 100% of the time there have been warning signs that have been observed by people. Nearly 80% of the times, the shooter has already told somebody. This is called the bystander problem. People have information that they're holding on to and not sharing. And so it's really important that we have anonymous tip lines and other ways to communicate information about kids who are potentially in crisis. Not that they've committed a crime, but that there are warning signs that you've seen. And then you need to take that information and process it through evidence-informed crisis response teams, which MCPS does use and our state does use. And then those teams can design the right kind of mental health or behavioral health intervention. So I think we have to spread awareness of the bystander problem. We have to spread awareness of the ways to communicate information, and that we have to spread information that we do have in place crisis response teams whose goal is not to punish, but it is to take action. Crisis response team may, if the threat is of such a nature, involve law enforcement, of course. But for nearly all of these threats, what we're trying to do is get ahead of these issues and prevent the incident before it happens.
Last quick question. Would you support mandatory gun safety ed, sort of like driver's ed, which would be required before a gun can be purchased?
I think training is really important. I think that if you're going to carry a concealed gun in public, And that's the kind of information that you need, and it's the kind of proficiency you have to show. I think we should be communicating the benefits of secure storage in lots of different ways. I think we should be communicating the risk of suicide and a gun in the home in lots of different ways. So, the mandatory is like a challenging part of the question, because what does that mean? What I really think, my answer is I see lots of opportunities for us all who will commit to standing up to gun violence in all its forms to spread those messages of awareness. The Moms Demand Action Be Smart program is an incredibly effective way to communicate about secure storage, which is like a pretty instrumental part of training. But we also have gun stores that have been participating in things called like Gun Shop Project, which is about suicide prevention. I think we've seen schools take action. We haven't seen Montgomery MCPS do enough, in my opinion, in terms of raising awareness about secure storage. But the Arlington schools just took action, and about 2 million kids, over 2 million kids, live in school districts that the schools affirmatively send home information, letters about secure storage. That's what we need in our district, I'd say.
Okay. Very, very last question. Do you have a greater concern for handguns or assault rifles? Is that an answerable question?
So, I mean, handguns drive both homicide and suicide. Those are the firearms that are used predominantly in homicide and suicide, which I think most people don't recognize. And so if we are looking to reduce the greatest amount of gun violence, I do think that it's focusing on access to handguns and the kind of standards for acquisition.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rob Wilcox. Today was a fascinating discussion, and I feel enlightened and really motivated to get more involved. And I hope all of you do as well. Thanks so much for spending the time with us today.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to just go out with some slides here about our upcoming events. As you are tuning off, we do have Representative Jamie Raskin coming next Tuesday, less than a week away, January 25th at 7 p.m. And he will be talking about his new book called Unthinkable. There's a limited number of signed books that are available for WDC members at Politics and Prose via their website. And that would be for a 10% discount. And you would use the code SPECIAL10 at checkout. We also have upcoming our virtual Annapolis Day. So February 26th, put it on your calendar, 9 to 12 p.m. 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. We will be hosting our virtual Annapolis Day. There will be updates from our state legislators and WDC priority issue breakout rooms. It's a special event for us with the ability to connect directly with the Montgomery County delegation. And since Annapolis Day is a members only event, please visit our website to join or renew your membership today, womensdemocratic.club.org. Thank you again for attending our special session today, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.